When it comes to understanding the relationship between biology and behavior, it's important to understand that genetics do tend to play some role in a variety of different behaviors. So it's worth understanding some basics of genetics. For starters, when we're talking about twins, we generally will be talking about either identical or fraternal twins. Identical twins, also known as monozygotic, come from one zygote. This means one egg is fertilized and splits into two or more separate developing human beings. This means because it is coming from one zygote, identical twins tend to have incredibly similar DNA. They do not quite reach 100%, but relatively close. Fraternal twins, on the other hand, are also known as dizygotic twins. This means they come from two or more zygotes, so more than one single egg was developed. Fraternal twins tend to have less overlapping DNA, so less similarity in their DNA. In terms of understanding heritability, when we discussed heritability estimates, we are referring to the amount of variability that can be accounted for by genetics within a population. Heritability estimates do not apply to individuals. So even if we know some behavior or condition has a very high heritability estimate, for example, schizophrenia has a relatively high heritability estimate of in the 80%. This tells us that 80% of schizophrenia across the population can be attributed to genetics, but it does not necessarily tell us anything about an individual's risk of developing schizophrenia if their parents did or did not have schizophrenia. We also need to appreciate that although some conditions or disorders or behaviors are monogenic, meaning they come from or are determined by one gene, most of what we talk about within the field of psychology is polygenic. This means that multiple or many genes will influence a behavior or condition. Additionally, we need to understand the role of dominant versus recessive genes. Whenever a dominant gene is present, whether there are two dominant genes together or a dominant and recessive, the dominant gene is expressed. For a recessive gene to be expressed, we need to have two recessive genes together. Otherwise, the dominant gene will overshadow the recessive, and the recessive will not be expressed. In terms of expression, we also need to understand that there is a difference between genotype and phenotype. Genotype speaks to the genetic makeup. For example, if I am referring to the presence of a dominant and dominant gene, or a dominant and recessive gene, or a recessive and recessive gene paired together. Those are different types of genotypes. Phenotype, on the other hand, refers to the physical traits that we see. A phenotype may look similar, whereas a genotype differs. For instance, if I had a dominant gene paired with another dominant gene, and a dominant gene paired with another recessive, the phenotype might look similar in those two human beings, but their genotype is different. One person has two dominant genes to pass along, one person has a dominant and recessive. So a phenotype will refer to what that gene looks like when it is actually expressed, so in terms of physical traits. Finally, when it comes to genes, it's important to understand epigenetics. Epigenetics is the study of how genes and environment interact. So even if I have a gene which predisposes me to certain conditions, disorders, or traits, those genes may be expressed differently or not expressed at all, depending upon the environment. In a sense, the environment can turn on or turn off certain genes, causing them to be expressed or not. Likewise, just as our environment can influence our genes can influence our environment. So if we have certain genetic predispositions, we might select certain environments. In terms of genes, they provide what's called a range of reaction. We can think of this as our potential. Our environment will move us within that range of reaction, within that potential. So if we are in a nurturing environment, that can bring us to our highest potential set by our genes. But if we are in a negative or harmful environment, that can hold us down in our lowest potential based on our genes.